If you're looking to connect with the top minds in learning and talent, there's no better place than an iVentiv event. That's IVENTIV. Since 2009, they've hosted nearly 300 interactive conversational events exclusively for senior leaders like global heads of learning. I've been a sponsor myself and found these events invaluable. Less about sitting and listening, more about real, impactful conversations. It's an unmatched opportunity to collaborate with leading chief learning officers on the challenges they're tackling today. Join the conversation. Visit iventiv.com/learninghack. That's iventiv.com/learninghack. Welcome to a new season of the Learning Hack, and we're kicking off with a significant milestone. This is our 100th episode.
Mad, isn't it?
I know. I can't believe it either. Welcome to the Learning Hack, a podcast about the people and technologies that are creating the future of learning. I'm John Helmer.
Now guess what?
Learning is cool. Learning is cool. Learning is cool. I'm learning.
Learning is fun.
Knowledge is power.
Knowledge.
Education.
We've talked to a lot of people over the last 5 years on this podcast who have ideas for how learning ought to be organised and strategised for within organisations. Some of those ideas were really good, some were great, but did they work? Did they even get adopted? You can have the best corporate learning strategy in the world, after all, but if you can't get the resources to do it, the right people in your team, buy-in from top management at strategic level, and most importantly, the money, it will not go anywhere. So how do you do it? To find this out, we talked to one of the most well-respected and successful CLOs in the workplace industry today, Kate Fitzgerald, head of FACT. Who is he?
Hack Facts.
Simon Brown is a trailblazer in the world of corporate learning and development. Simon currently serves as the Global Learning and Development Leader at EY and is the international best-selling author of The Curious Advantage. Previously, he held the position of Chief Learning Officer at Novartis, where he spearheaded the company's Go Big on Learning initiative. With a career spanning roles at Accenture and as co-founder of Brightwave, Simon has consistently pushed the boundaries of organisational learning. His expertise in fostering curiosity and driving innovation has made him a sought-after speaker and thought leader in the field of corporate education and talent development.
Simon is also a podcaster and author of a best-selling book, both of which centre on the subject of curiosity. So he has as his calling card one of those big abstract nouns that people love and also loathe so much in our space. So I was curious to know, why curiosity, Simon? So Simon, it's great to have you on the podcast. Welcome to the Learning Hack.
Thank you, John. Great to be with you. Yeah.
So Simon, apart from your many other accomplishments, which are many, you're co-author of The Curious Advantage, which is a book, and co-host of a very good podcast, also called The Curious Advantage. I actually had to listen to it the other day, and I just found it completely engrossing, which is quite rare for other people's podcasts. So The Curious Advantage, curiosity is sort of your thing. We've covered curiosity before on this podcast back in 2002 when I interviewed Stefan van Hooijdonk, who you'll know, who is founder of the Global Curiosity Institute. So curiosity is kind of his thing as well. There's a lot of it about. I've been known to express some skepticism, but I'm gradually coming around. I'm interested to know, what was it that caused you personally to zero in on this particular abstract noun as vital for personal development rather than, say, I don't know, resilience or having a growth mindset or any number of other things? Why is curiosity, do you think, so central?
Yeah. So maybe go back to where it all started around curiosity. So spent 10 years working at Novartis, last 5 as Chief Learning Officer there. And those 5 years was during the transformation of the culture there. And the CEO, Vas Narasimhan, had defined the culture as inspired, curious, and unbossed. And he chose those 3 words based upon the work of Dan Pink in Drive, where he talks about autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And Vas wanted to sort of evolve that into his own way of thinking, and curiosity was his replacement for mastery. And so that then became part of the Novartis culture journey. And in my role there as Chief Learning Officer, it was around how do we foster curiosity through learning or to support learning, which sort of gets to thinking that actually curiosity is bigger than learning, but it's also behind learning, that if we're curious, it inspires us to learn, inspires us to experiment, inspire us to seek more. So after several years of that journey in supporting the culture transformation there, through our work across the learning team, a couple of people said to me in the space of a few weeks, you should write a book about what you've been doing at Novartis. I've never thought about writing a book, but that prompted me to think about it. I was having dinner with some friends, Paul and Garrick, who had written a book before. I picked their brains around what was involved in writing a book, and they said, well, why don't we collaborate together and actually write the book together? And at that point I was thinking it was going to be a bit like Laszlo Bock's book Work Rules, which was around the sort of Google journey. And so I was thinking I'd do a Novartis equivalent of that. But the more we thought about it, it sort of evolved into being broader around curiosity. And while it included the Novartis journey, we also sort of went into studying the benefits and the research around curiosity. So that was where it all started. And that then led into the podcast and the sort of ongoing interest since then.
I suppose the thing that slightly won me around it was, well, Stefan had this thing about curiosity being the roots of innovation, which I think is a good point. The other thing is something that occurred to me, but surely isn't an original insight, is that now that we're living in this world with all the knowledge in the world in our pockets, in our smart devices, knowledge is more accessible and more of it to an individual than it's ever been before. So the limits of your learning are really the limits of your curiosity.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Would agree that I think the world is changing faster than it's ever changed before. Everything's accelerating. We're getting new trends being adopted faster than ever before. ChatGPT being sort of a prime example of that. And how do you navigate through a world that is changing so fast? You can't rely on your remembered facts, because it may well be things have changed since then. And to your point, you can call up facts and knowledge now at the click of a few buttons through the internet. So how do you navigate that? Well, you're curious. You ask questions. You're asking what if. You're experimenting, and through that exploration, through those experiments, can figure out how to do things. That there is no longer a playbook that you can pick up and will answer most of what you need to know, which 50 years ago there probably was. In many areas there was a common set of thinking of what good looks like, whereas in many areas now things are moving so fast it's hard to know what good looks like. And so you navigate it through by creating a safe environment for a team, getting everyone to ask questions, to experiment, and apply that curiosity as to what's the best way forward.
That's an interesting point, because in a way you're kind of, there's a contradiction in there, because I'm saying, all the knowledge in the world is there now. It's all accessible. But what you're saying is something different, that actually, because of all this stuff around, there is no longer, the trusted source. This is the way, this is what you need to know, this is what you need to believe, and so on in this profession. There's more profusion, more difference of conflicting insights and so on. You feel that's the case, do you? It's more confusing for people.
It's a bit of both, I would say. So there is to say there isn't knowledge we can rely on wouldn't be true. There are things where there is a clear right answer. The rules of physics are the rules of physics, etc. So there are things where this is the way we do it. This is the best way of doing it. But there are also many areas where we need to question whether things are true, whether the way we've always done it is the right way, and therefore there are better ways. So I mean, a good way of thinking of that is what got me where I am today is not going to get me to where I'm going tomorrow. That the path that we're relying on maybe from before is not the way you would do things now looking to the future. And in learning, that's probably as true as in many other areas. That if I look at my own experience, the way that 5 years ago we sort of planned out what does a learning strategy need to look like is very different to how today we're planning out what does a learning strategy need to look like. The big difference in there being AI as part of that, but that has impacts on every aspect of learning, of how we manage learning, how we develop learning, what learning actually looks like in a world of AI. So if I go back to a blueprint of 5 years ago and just say, well, I'll take that and apply that again, it's out of date. It's no longer relevant. It was very valid at the time, but the world is moving so quickly that even in 5 years, you need to come up with something again from scratch.
There's a lot in there that I'd like to pick up a bit later in this conversation. But first of all, let's talk a bit more about your experience, which you mentioned. I'd like to talk a bit about your background. We have a tiny bit of shared history in that we met when we were both in startups around the turn of the millennium. Yep. And shared some office space.
Yes.
Your startup was, of course, Brightwave, which went on to great things, now part of Capita. My startup was slightly more rocky. But can you fill in for me what you did before and after that? What's been your journey to becoming one of the most admired and high-profile CLOs to come out of the UK learning industry?
So that was probably nearly 25 years ago.
Yeah, it's ancient history.
24 years ago. Yeah, scary. Yeah. So did management degree at Royal Holloway, University of London. Wasn't quite sure what to do coming out of that. I went to the career service. They said, I want to be a management consultant because I'd gone through the book and that seemed to be the best paying career in the book. And they said, oh no, you don't want to be a management consultant. You want to be an accountant. And my dad had been an accountant. So I was like, okay, I don't really know anything about this world of work. So I followed their advice and ended up at PwC as a trainee accountant and auditor. Did that for about 18 months. Started to think, well, this maybe isn't the career that I want to spend the rest of my life doing, and got involved in doing some PowerPoint presentations around software revenue recognition, which sounds very dull, but actually it was interactive presentations burning onto CD-ROM. And I was like, oh, actually this technology of sort of interaction and CD-ROMs, we could use this for all sorts of things like training and things, and actually found it really interesting. And so I found there was a team within PwC that was doing consultancy around computer-based training, became known as e-learning probably a year after I joined them. And so I switched out of accountancy into this training consulting team with PwC, and then did that for a couple of years. And then one summer over a beer with a friend in London, we decided we could actually come up with an e-learning company that could rival some of the suppliers that we were using, and that was the start of Brightwave. So beginning of 2001, we both left PwC to go and set up Brightwave. And that was the point we were together in the office in Hove those many moons ago, and then was there for a few years, and then moved on from there to Accenture. Spent 7 years with Accenture as a management consultant around learning and training, talent transformation, ultimately leading their learning strategy team in the UK. I was working with clients like Microsoft and BP, HSBC, on sort of big learning transformation or learning strategy projects. And then did some work with Lloyds Banking Group around their academy strategy. And they then said, do you want to come and implement the strategy? So I thought, after 7 years of being a consultant, maybe I should test out whether my advice has actually been any good and go and actually follow through on one of these projects. And so I moved in-house. And that was around the time I had my first child, my son. So that was a good time to switch away from the consulting life into something a little bit more predictable and steady. So I did 3 years at Lloyd's. The academy strategy became an enterprise learning transformation. And we transformed the learning way of working and team there. And then as that was coming to an end, Novartis came knocking to say, do you want to come and set up some global sales and marketing academies out of Switzerland for one of the divisions there? So I moved over to Switzerland, which is where I still live now. And what was originally planned to be a sort of 3 to 5 year, get some international experience and then head back to the UK. I really liked Novartis, really liked Switzerland, and ended up in a whole host of different roles there over 10, 11 years. And then recently moved to EY to take on the next challenge, which was back in February of this year.
Yeah. So you made a big impact as head of the learning team at Novartis for 10 plus years. It was a really good team. I began to hear a lot about that team and the things you were doing. And when I started the podcast, I interviewed at least 2 of its members on the Learning Hack, Miriam Nealon and regular guest Caroline Ford. Met others in the team. And it just seemed so impressive and was very high profile and looked to by other practitioners. So how did you form that team? What were you looking for in the people you led? And what do you think was the secret of that success?
Lots of questions there. I agree with you. Fantastic team there. So across the 10, 11 years there, it sort of started out in a divisional role, trying to sort of transform learning within one of the divisions, moved into then another division to try and do sort of similar in that area. So from the pharmaceutical division into their drug development division, and then moved into a central role. And then it was sort of from that central role where there was greater influence over the strategy of the whole company. And that was at the time then where Vas was coming in as the new CEO, and there was an opportunity to shape a new learning strategy for Novartis overall. Interestingly, it was April 2018 sort of put together an initial idea of what that strategy would look like. And we took that to the HR leadership team there. And it was like, we like everything in here, but there's no new money for it. So, okay. So we then sort of started on that journey, but sort of beg, stealing and borrowing around how to achieve everything in there. Then with Vas as the new CEO, the culture transformation started. And as part of that culture, we came up with a people strategy for Novartis. We'd had HR strategies before, but the people strategy was sort of all elements that touch the people across the company. And in there, it was decided to differentiate around my growth, my leadership, and my impact. And so my growth element of that was around learning and providing great opportunities to learn. It tied to the curiosity element in the culture. And that provided the opportunity then to go to the executive team in order to make the case to say, well, we've got this sort of learning strategy here of how we want to transform learning. We don't have any additional funds to do it, but this is what we could achieve. We've now decided as part of the people strategy, we want to differentiate Novartis around learning. So this is what we need. We asked for funding, we asked for a commitment of time around learning, we asked for the creation of a single learning operating model, and they said yes to that. And that funding allowed us then to recruit a team, or sort of add to the team with some key roles that we hadn't had previously, and that was where Caroline and Miriam and many other hugely talented people came and joined the team there in order to, whether it was around learning design, learning analytics, learning strategy, we sort of built up an incredible team of hugely capable people in order to then shape that strategy and that transformation journey over the coming years.
What were you looking for when you went looking for those people? Curiosity, presumably, but
yeah. I think
other things.
We'd sort of carved out what capabilities we needed within the team, and then it was looking for great people with deep experience in those areas, and who would fit into the team, and sort of shared the vision of creating an organizer or creating a learning team that would be able to inspire curiosity and provide amazing opportunities for people to learn, and with a great sense of purpose that you get working for a company like Novartis, where you're impacting people's lives around the world as well. So we were really fortunate to get an incredible team, and with incredible skill set, and people with amazing experience of having done things before.
The Learning Hack podcast is supported by Learning News, the learning sector's newswire. Rob and his team are good friends of the podcast, and we really value the help and advice we've had from them, and they do a great job. For the very latest news from around the learning sector, for interviews with learning leaders, the latest from learning sector vendors, and features on workplace learning, go to learningnews.com. It's interesting what you say, because I think a lot of people in smaller companies won't think that a kind of big, well-resourced enterprise company like Novartis, that it's hard to get the money to fund a strategy, an innovative learning strategy like the one you had there. But it sounds like it was arguing for the investment and the resources you needed to carry that vision out that was very much part of your leadership role there. Of course, people within other enterprise companies will know that this is what it always involved. But to what extent did that involve changing the mindset about learning of those you had to deal with? In other words, kind of like going to the top team and saying, with the begging bowl, and saying, I want to do this, I want this money. And did you encounter any kind of understanding, resistance? Did they have a kind of, rather old-fashioned view of what training was, put people in a room and show them PowerPoints? What was that journey like, talking to the business?
I think we were fortunate in there was a fairly enlightened leadership team, and definitely a CEO who absolutely sort of got it and was a big supporter and advocate for learning, and was essentially driving it with the culture change. I think making the case for that investment in learning is never easy, and requires a lot of, I think, data points and evidence as to why it's necessary, especially if you're asking for a very large number, which we were at that point. So, and we made the case based on essentially sort of two main arguments, which was one, if we want to attract and retain the best people, then, and this is for the company overall, we need to have fantastic learning. And there were many data points around learning being the number one reason that people join, lack of learning or not getting what they needed being one of the top reasons that people were leaving. We had internal ideas jams where people were putting ideas around what the future culture looked like, and learning was coming out several times in the sort of top 5 ideas of what people wanted to see. So there's a lot of data that said, to attract people, we need great learning. To retain people, we need great learning. So that's sort of one side of the argument. But that's not a or it's one level removed from a direct business benefit from learning. So then the other side of the argument was actually as a business, we also need to be investing in learning. We had a new strategy that had come with the new CEO. That new strategy involved data and digital, it involved operational excellence, etc. And behind all of that was new skills. And then the data is showing how quickly skills are expiring, how fast new skills are coming. And so in order to deliver against the business strategy, you also need to get great at learning and be able to build the skills across 100,000 people that we had at that point. So when you put those two arguments together, you end up then with, if we want to attract and retain the best people, we need to get great at learning. If we want to deliver the business strategy, we need to get great at learning. And even as a sort of Venn diagram, the intersect of those two, there's things like data science, where at the time, if we invest in data science, if that's a hot skill that our people want, and it's a hot skill that the business needs and it's hard to get from the market. So, investment there is a double whammy. It's hitting both of those arguments. So that was the sort of case that we built out with many data points, both internal and external, on both of those. And then sort of coupled with that was also, and how people want to learn is changing, that we have bite-sized learning, we have MOOCs, we have other elements that we were hearing there was demand for. And so we need to be investing in the right formats of learning for people to be able to get what they need as well. And that argument held up, and that sort of led to the investment that we needed.
So it's primarily making the case in terms of business benefits and based on data.
That's how I personally have found it, and we'll be having similar conversations in my new role over the next few weeks as well around what is the case for investments in learning, and ultimately it comes down, I think, to it's a key reason for people joining large organizations is the development opportunities, and it's the skills that those development opportunities provide create the ability for the organization to execute. And the counter argument is, what if you don't invest in learning? Well, you're going to have out-of-date methods, out-of-date ideas, out-of-date concepts that, your competitors, if they're investing, they will have knowledge of the latest tools, the latest ways to do things, the latest knowledge, and how over the medium to long term do you compete with that? It was many years ago that Peter Senge talked about how learning faster than your competition is the only sustainable competitive advantage. And I think that still holds true today.
You're talking there about being in Novartis in a kind of IP-driven business that's full of knowledge workers, and the other parts of industry you worked in, kind of accountancy, finance, they're of a similar character. Do you think it's very specific to the sectors, to these particular sectors, to make that kind of strategy work? I mean, what about when you move into the more kind of, businesses where people make things and do things and pull resources out of the earth and drill on oil rigs and so on? Do you think it changes a lot? The reason I'm asking this question, it might seem a bit kind of irrelevant, but the research I did ages ago about the training industry was it was always very, very kind of fragmented and organised. It was very sector specific. You had training companies that trained in a particular sector and not in any others. And suddenly, bang, when the internet came along, it all kind of got agglomerated, and we have an approach which is deemed to kind of fit any organisation. Do you think that holds?
So my personal view is there are different ways of learning that are needed for different situations, and part of the job of a CLO or a learning leadership team is to sort of figure out what is the right structure for the organization that they are responsible for. And if we take Novartis as an example, you have very different workforces there. There is a manufacturing side where the medicines are made, and there's factories around the world that produce the medicines. And then you have a deep science research body that has a very different set of learning needs. And then you have a sales force that has, again, a very different set of learning needs. Their day-to-day life is super different, from being in a lab to being in a manufacturing environment to being potentially in a car, or out meeting with doctors in their places of work. So the way that people learn in those situations, the type of learning that people need, very, very different. And so understanding where is there a need for consistency and where is there a need for differentiation, I think is a big part of a learning leader's role, to then structure the team that can support that. Because potentially having everything unique doesn't make sense, because you lose the efficiency, particularly of a large organization, of common systems and a common language and common leadership approach, etc. But having everything too standardized means you're not recognizing the difference of, I'm in a factory environment, I don't have a laptop, I don't have a work phone. If I can't get some training to operate this machine now, then I can't do my job. And so that's a very, very different environment to an office worker or something else. So recognizing those different needs and then building out solutions for those different needs is super important, but recognizing where does things also need to be standardized and consistent. And that, I think that is part of the job, and that doesn't change even when you go to, if I look now in the role within EY, on the face of it, one might say, well, it's all knowledge work, so it's all the same. But then when you dive down into the differences between a consulting workforce versus a tax workforce versus a audit and assurance workforce, actually there are then big differences in those. That taxation is typically very local because every country has different tax rules, so you can't standardize training across countries in the same way, whereas consulting, how you implement AI is probably far more consistent. So certain things you need to operate globally, certain things you need to operate locally, and how you build training, how you deliver training, all of these things will therefore be nuanced into those types of answers. And I think that's the job, is in building a structure that is right for how that can operate with as much consistency as one can get. But also recognizing the importance of the difference based on sector and role and all of these other pieces.
Yeah, of course, I didn't mean to suggest that pharma companies don't make stuff. Of course, they do make stuff. And nowadays, I swallow a lot of their products every single morning and night for medicinal reasons, I should say. So let's talk about your current role. You're now with EY. Obviously, that's what you're really focused on at the moment since February this year. Can you talk a bit about your role there? You have a talent remit, which I guess is wider than you had at Novartis, a bit wider than learning. So embracing the whole employee life cycle, I'd guess. Although, by the way you've been talking, maybe you've been kind of fishing in those waters already. I'm interested in how you see those two things, learning and talent, fitting together. I used to work, my last full-time job was within a vendor company that had both learning divisions and talent divisions. So I was aware that there were conflicts. Do you feel there are conflicts there? Does it all fit together seamlessly?
Yeah, so different organizations, you end up with sort of different language, different terminology. So within EY, talent is the term that's sort of referred to for what I would have previously called HR, I guess. So the talent team is the HR team. I sit within that team, and my job title is a global learning and development leader. So it has the learning remit, but also then has leadership development, has succession, has sort of career development elements as well. So yes, it is broader than my previous role, which was purely the learning piece. This has some of those other elements like succession and broader development and leadership development in there as well. It also then scales up from sort of 100,000 people to EY is about 400,000 people globally. So there's a scope extension and then a sort of scale extension as well, which is part of the excitement and the challenge for me and the reason behind moving.
Yeah, interesting. And you've you feel there's no conflict between talent and learning in that sense? Because,
No,
well, I mean, some people often feel there's a kind of a bit of a conflict between HR and learning, and some people kind of fret about the fact that learning tends to be a subset of HR. Do you see any conflicts there?
No, I'm generally of the view if you can make it work wherever you sit in these things. But if I look at the current role, I think there is a huge value from sitting within HR because in order to achieve a lot of the things that we need to achieve, we need very close integration with some of those wider HR processes and functions. And that's very much what I see as we're working on our talent strategy together, our HR strategy across the talent team, that those connections are what will make us collectively successful. And if we operate in the silo, then actually we won't be able to realize the value. So an example of that would be something like a skills-based approach. So within learning, we're looking at how do we tie what we're doing to skills, and then how do you tie that through to other HR processes. So you have roles tied to skills, you have the ability to potentially ultimately schedule based on skills, that you recruit based on skills, that we develop people based on skills. If you've got that consistency, you've got a red thread through all of those different HR processes, and that requires great collaboration across all of those areas for that to be able to work in terms of data and building models based upon that common skills taxonomy, etc. So I think to realize the value of some of the current or future HR processes, I think you need that close integration. Performance management would be another one. If you're trying to train people in certain skills, but there's no incentive to deliver those skills, leadership development as an example, if your performance management is tied to also as a leader how you demonstrate those leadership skills, you're going to be paying much more attention than if there's no credence given to you applying your leadership skills. So the more embedded you can have things across the HR processes, I think the more power everybody gets from the likelihood of success of those different pieces.
You mentioned skills a lot there. My most recent conversation was with Charles Jennings, expressing a bit of scepticism about the way that the industry, talking really about the vendor industry, has embraced the idea of skills and skills taxonomies. Do you feel the vendors are making an appropriate response to the need to develop based on skills?
So there's always sort of what's the current theme or hot topic that attracts attention and leads to conversations and things. And I think skills has probably been the hot topic for the last couple of years. But I do personally believe there is substance behind that hype, that the notion of being able to hire someone based upon a skills profile, for them being able to understand their strengths and weaknesses within that profile, and then being able to articulate clear learning and development paths through whatever format that build out those skills, and then being able to identify and apply people against work based upon those skills, and be able to see your career path and future development path based upon a set of skills. For me, there is a big value in there in how you tie all of those processes together. And whether it is skills or competencies or whatever you want to call it, having a language that is consistent across all of those pieces is the bit that is important for me. And today we're calling that skills. In years gone by, we called that competencies. We weren't necessarily wholly successful with competencies because of the logistics of trying to track it and keep it up to date and things, the joy of technology today. And I think this is where we need the help of the vendors, is to use AI and other technology to be able to keep these paths and keep that skills approach current and live, which was a huge amount of work in the past, which meant we didn't necessarily get the return on investment from that. But if we can put AI to work so that it helps us in understanding the skills someone has, it helps map our learning content to the right skills, it helps map our jobs to the right skills, and then it ties all of that together, then I think that goal of actually having a consistency across all of those different HR processes and creating the transparency of someone of where they are and what's needed to get to another role or get to another area of the business is hugely valuable.
It's a really good summary you've given there of how people are looking to AI to unpick that knot we have with skills and we previously didn't really manage to nail with competencies. I'd like to talk about AI more broadly, really, and in a more forward-looking way. It's a great tool for leveraging a person's curiosity.
Yes.
But is there a danger that when answers to any question you might have come to you so rapidly, it really is quite startling how quickly you can get answers to questions with ChatGPT now. It shuts down certain habits of inquiring mind, e.g. reflection and skepticism and so on. What can you do to reassure naysayers, and there are many in the learning space, that generative AI used for learning isn't, for instance, just going to breed a whole generation of fluent and well-informed idiots?
There's a big question there. So I guess my take on Gen AI is there is a lot of value to be had there, but it is also very early days in the technology. But I think there is a lot of opportunity in the short to medium term for it to be able to help us within learning. Will it make us all dumb? I hope not. That I think if we use it in the right way, if we build our skills around how we can use it, then it could be the opposite. I was at a session recently with Bob Johansson, a futurologist, who I guess deeply knowledgeable about AI, but with also incredible thoughts. And he talked about how he had spent 3 hours conversing with his AI, which he had trained on all his books and all of his articles and whatever, and he was using it as a thought partner over a sort of 3-hour conversation. And so I think for me, that's sort of the opportunity of where it could get to, rather than at face value asking it a question, getting an answer, assuming that answer is correct, and sort of moving on. Actually, the power of AI as a thought partner to be able to bounce ideas around, generate ideas, play different roles to challenge you, be devil's advocate, all of these pieces, actually, I think it can provide us with a lot of strengths. And also from a learning perspective, I think it can provide us with a very interesting future learning channel of actually having the AI training and teaching me. And some of the recent things with ChatGPT 4.0, the video that was with Sal Khan and his son using it around a maths problem, which I'm sure many people have seen, where it's actually acting as a tutor. It's not giving the answer, but it's coaching and guiding and helping someone to solve, in this case, a child solving a maths problem. But if we take that principle, if we train AI upon our processes, upon certain knowledge, it can then play that role of a helpful guide, tutor, coach in letting us learn at exactly the point that we want to learn or need to learn. And if you then couple it with some of the technologies like Copilot, then potentially it becomes truly in the flow of work, a coach that is both a coach for us, but also a partner that is actually working for us. So Copilot is reformatting our PowerPoint, adding in things, etc. And then there's something I'm not understanding in there. So I can then learn from the AI, learn from the Copilot in order to get what I need at exactly the point I need. And then it can help me performing certain tasks. So I think there is a very interesting future of work as these technologies develop, where learning in the flow of work actually takes the form of learning from a co-pilot or an AI assistant that is helping guide us. All sorts of challenges around hallucination and validity of data and all these pieces that we will need to get over to make that work. But in principle, the the opportunity is already there to an extent in asking ChatGPT to teach me about whatever. I've used it, or we have EYQ as our internal AI assistant. Many times I've used it. Explain me this concept as though I'm a 10-year-old, and suddenly it makes sense. And I've learned that way, and it's quicker to use the AI in that way than it is to try and find it from other sources.
Very often with conversations about AI, we fall into this kind of habit of, we'll just wait what it's going to see in the next 2 years. And, it's developing very rapidly. So a lot of kind of conversations and questions about AI with learning get slightly kicked into the future. It's like, you can't actually do that now. But looking at your new role and looking at what you have with in the armory with AI to apply now, what would you say is the state of the art for using AI within learning within an enterprise organization like your own?
So I think there's several use cases already that are applicable within learning. There's AI in terms of the development of content. So all the way through from coming up with initial drafts of content, helping remove such a burden on subject matter experts by being able to fill in the blanks. And I've heard sort of many examples where it's been used to sort of come up with 10 scenarios for a particular case, and then break out each of those 10 scenarios into sort of 10 sub-levels, and you go to then the subject expert, and it's like, okay, we need a scenario for this training. Here's 10 ideas. And I say, oh, okay, well, that one works for me. And then you go, okay, and here's 10 sub-ideas underneath that. And before you know it, you've got your scenario, and that might have taken weeks before to sort of go away, come up with some ideas, come back. That's not quite right. Here's something to guide you in the right direction. So I think there's already cases where it can help in that sort of front end, defining scenarios, building out subject expertise or subject matter expertise into sort of first drafts and things, so that subject matter time is better. Then there's the creation itself. So we have an AI course builder tool that allows us to rapidly create content using AI internally. Also things like Synthesia or Colossian, where it allows sort of video generation to avatar type generation, save time. Tools like Midjourney and DALL-E in order to do image generation. So I think there's many aspects today where it already can accelerate the timeline to be able to script content, create content, develop assets, and potentially in more sophisticated ways. I've heard examples of AI-driven simulations. We're looking at a program across the whole company that's powered by Gen AI inside it at the moment to build skills around AI. So there's lots of ways already, I think, where it can bring benefit. And then beyond the content piece, there's then how AI is used to present personalized learning paths through sort of learning experience platforms, how it can be used to tag and understand content and better organize content. So there's many behind the scenes elements as well, I think, where it can help too. So I think already there is a lot of uses, and it's just going to get more and more powerful with each generation.
So it's interesting, sketching out a really interesting near future, I think, for enterprise learning, and people will watch what you're doing very closely, as they did at Novartis, I think. I know that one thing that has come with your new job is enrolment in the Strategic Leadership for Partners program led by Harvard Business School professors. Sounds like an enviable learning opportunity. What's it been like taking part in that? And more broadly, how do you pursue your own learning?
So that was a couple of weeks ago in Boston, which was fantastic experience. So Ashish Nanda, who's the Harvard professor who was running that program, and his colleagues were super impressive in terms of going into specific case studies around different sort of strategic elements of leadership, and it was 50 of our partners from around the world, and that was, I was there both to experience it as one of our flagship leadership programs, but also as an attendee for my own learning. And I definitely learnt a huge amount. And we were joined during that week by our CEO, Janet Troncali, was there for 90 minutes. Our CHRO, or Global Talent Lead, my boss, Trent Henry, was there. So it was also a chance for the group to be able to hear from top leaders as well around our strategy. So yeah, that was a great learning experience, and is the type of program that we have for our people as well. My own learning beyond that, maybe why the curiosity element of Novartis resonated is I do have an inherent curiosity, and AI is at the moment where a lot of that curiosity is being channeled into sort of understand the latest developments, understand the opportunities. So whether that is podcasts, whether that is reading through LinkedIn and other pieces, whether that is through the Curious Advantage podcast, where I use that as my own learning experience, where we get to have super interesting people on and I get to ask them questions with Paul and Garrick and get to learn a huge amount from incredibly clever and inspiring people. So that's a fantastic
great, isn't it?
learning experience as well. So all sorts. And my diary is pretty hectic and busy, but squeezing it in. Even so, earlier this morning I had to go and pick my wife up from school and bring her home, and so in the car on the way there, I've got the latest AI podcast news on, and can be just absorbing what are the latest developments in there. So the formal learning, the learning from others, squeezing it in around other pieces, and then more structured learning as well. There's a Coursera course. Gen AI is your thought partner, which I went through the other day. So there's structured learning, and there's these other elements as well. So
a whole mix there. Interesting. Lastly, who would you really follow, and touch a bit of name dropping? What would you say are the best sources for you that you always go to? Who do you have bookmarked and follow regularly to keep up?
One I have on my desk. So Ethan Mollick at the moment is...
I knew you were going to say Ethan Mollick. Everybody says Ethan Mollick.
So from an AI perspective, he has fantastic ideas. I listened to an AI news podcast from Jaden Schaefer, who we had on the Curious Advantage podcast. Yeah,
that's interesting. That's a really interesting podcast.
Yeah, and he does pretty much daily updates, so sort of 5-10 minutes. So it's a great way to sort of keep up to date with some of the latest elements. So he's someone I follow. LinkedIn is always a good source for me of information. And then there's various sort of community forums that I belong to, with the conference board and other groups like that, where I can learn from my peers and understand who else across the learning leader community is doing interesting things that I can learn from, and maybe we can apply some of those principles. There's a local group in Switzerland that I run of Swiss learning leaders, where we get together. Where every few months, and due another one of those soon, where we just informally sort of share what we're all up to. So many different groups, but Ethan Mollick definitely. Jaden is someone else, and then many other sort of learning leaders that I try to learn from. Well,
you're a learning leader, and we've learned a lot from you today. I hope so. Sorry, it doesn't sound terribly glib, but thank you very much. I really appreciate you're taking the time to do this, and I've really enjoyed it today. Thanks, Simon.
Great to talk to you, John. Thanks for having me.
That's all on the Learning Hack podcast for this time. Many thanks to our guest and to our sponsors.
The Learning Hack is among the top 5% most listened to podcasts globally, according to Listen Notes, we found out. But it depends for its existence solely on sponsorship and your Patreon contributions. If you want us to continue holding these excellent conversations about learning, it's you who said they're excellent, not us. Let's have a chat about your company sponsoring. Or sign up to patreon.com/learninghack, and for a piddlingly small amount of money, get transcripts, text summaries, and early access. Keep us alive. Until next time.
Stay curious, learning people.
Now I finally